Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate that. So, I mean, it's terrible to hear that I'm in between a beer break, and I will let you guys go early for sure. And second, I want to give Crystal and the Canadian Cannabis Summit a big round of applause for putting this on here. Just because it's not easy to be hosting cannabis events, sticking your neck out for even at this stage of the game, and then generating interest. So big round of applause for Crystal here. So I'll talk a little bit about myself quickly, and then I'll give my business a bit of a shameless plug, and then we'll move on to a presentation that's really aimed at the legalities around cannabis retail and aimed towards letting retailers know really what's coming. In looking at it, it's kind of boring because it's law-based, it's not really focused on the retail experience, so I'm going to try to meld them between the two. So a little bit about my business. Fifth First Parallel. My partner and I, who you heard from earlier on this morning, he was on the investment panel, Sunny Modhead, got together in about early 2016 and put our heads together, looked at what a retail or what a cannabis business should look like, started speaking to different groups around the country, and then looking down to the US and kind of seeing what was coming. And this, of course, was all on the back of Justin Trudeau announcing legalization and us trying to understand what this was going to look like. Ultimately, we decided that we wanted to become a vertically integrated cannabis producer here in Alberta. That meant we wanted to grow here in Alberta and sell here in Alberta through our own retail stores. So what we've done is ultimately aim to build a facility that is producing, this says 8,500 kilograms on it a year. It's actually 12,500, and this is 89,000 square feet. It's actually 110,000 square feet. And this is down in Lethbridge in a greenhouse type facility. Ultimately, we aim to scale up on a couple pieces of land that we own too, right next door. They are 5 acres that will ultimately scale to about 250,000 square feet. We are going to have 11 stores, which we've applied for here across Alberta, Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, et cetera, et cetera. And then ultimately what we want to do is we want to grow and sell about 70% of our own weed in stores here. And this model really came on the back of a group that we met down in Colorado called Live Well Enlightened Health. They are the largest retailer, largest producer, and largest refiner in the state of Colorado. Ultimately, they employ about 700 people, I think, across the state, and generate a very large number in revenue. So that was the business model that we really built our business on the back of. A little bit about myself is my background is as a lawyer. I worked at Denton's, which is a firm here in Calgary, for the past 4 years, and a firm named Flesky Flynn before that. My background as a lawyer, really, I feel that it gives me quite a lot of strength in this, just because everything is so compliance-based. So you'll see this presentation here is really technical, but it's aimed to really dissect the law. So I hope to do a little bit of that. I'll explain what I can, and just highlight where I think there's some really interesting things going on in our marketplace here. So I'm sure everyone's heard a lot about what happened over the last 2 years here. This is a timeline, such and such. If I was able to update this, I would have put last night's milestone event on this as June 7th. So the Senate voting in, legal weed is coming. That is a great thing. Amen, did I hear? No? I thought I did. So ultimately, this is a little bit about Alberta's marketplace. This is why we chose to be here. Not only was it home for us, but we saw the opportunity. These numbers are a little bit outdated right now, but you can get the gist of it. I think the most impressive number that we have here in Alberta, that based on the number of shipments made by licensed producers to Canadians, Alberta has the most number of shipments made by licensed producers sent into this province. So what that really means is Albertans love weed. So it's a great place to start a weed business, is what we thought. And so next, this is just a quick slide that really breaks down how the law works. So we've got the federal law that governs the growing of cannabis, the provincial law, which governs the retail of cannabis, and then the municipal, which governs where retail can really go. So when you're looking at this from a legal perspective, and this isn't just as a lawyer, it's anyone who wants to open a dispensary. You have to say, okay, so we're under the provincial law, but we also have to know where to place it. So we're under the municipal law as well. So we have to look at the land use bylaws, zoning, deal with all of the AGLC legislation that also is included in this, and it's a really big mess, but it's complex. So with this presentation, what I really want to do is start at the federal law, cover just one or two things, then move to the provincial law, and then move down to the municipal bylaws that we have to consider. And within all of this, I'm going to consider the AGLC policy as well, and just highlight a few different things that I think are really important for retailers or customers to know, and just how this process is going to work. So in Alberta, we have private retail. That's a huge win for us. The system's really going to mirror our alcohol-based system in some ways, but in terms of the advertising, the regulation, and the marketing around it, it's going to mirror tobacco. You can see not all provinces went that way. These are the retail province, or the provinces that did go a private retail model. And I think when you look at all of these provinces, other than British Columbia, we're of course the most populated. So that makes this opportunity even better. I couldn't imagine Alberta really going any other way than the way they went. It was simple to most people thinking it from a common sense approach. Just like we have private alcohol, let's have private cannabis stores. It made sense when you start growing down the numbers. Ontario injects, I think, $1.6 billion of operating costs into their LCBO model for the liquor stores. And from that, they generate about $893 million a year of profit. In Alberta, the AGLC ultimately injects about $35 million a year into the business, and from that pulls in $833 million. So, amen. Legal weed. I'm pretty excited. I have to say. Anyways, so Bill 26 was introduced in Alberta around November last year, if I can remember. My timeline would have helped if I explained that. And ultimately what it said was the AGLC is going to oversee all cannabis sales in Alberta, as we expected. So retail stores are going to look a lot like liquor stores, as I said. They are going to regulate the purchase, the storage, the transportation, importation into the province, the distribution, and the use of cannabis. What they're going to do is they're ultimately going to intersect the relationship between the supplier, which is the LP as we know them today, and ultimately the retailer. So suppliers are going to have a new middleman, not the drug dealer, just the general AGLC, which is the biggest drug dealer in the province now. And ultimately, then us, other smaller drug dealers, are going to buy it from the AGLC and then sell it to the province. So this gives them, Bill 26, the authority to carry out their public online sales. So they can be the largest retailer in the province through all online methods, or the AGLC website. And we will sell it through our bricks and mortar stores. AGLC will set the price, the minimum price if required. So they ultimately really wanted to speed. It's like the mic drop moment, but. Hello? Anyway, so ultimately there's going to be about 250 stores issued, licenses issued within the first year. No one entity will be able to own 15% or more of those, so that works out to 37 if you do the math. And the legal age to buy cannabis in Alberta is 18. A lot of this is the stuff that we see in the papers and we all know. But you'll see as we start getting down into it, the law really restricts the retailers like us. And ultimately, it's going to be a really tough environment to operate in. So if the retailers are not going to be familiar with the compliance aspect that is coming to them, they're going to be in trouble. Because if you get your license taken away for a day, no sales that day, of course. So the AGLC also will govern the advertising. And they've actually just yesterday, or 2 days ago, released their updated policy on cannabis advertising. And of course, just like the Cannabis Act, it is exceptionally restrictive. These are things that we're all going to have to look. So stores are restricted from advertising their products that they carry, even though they are not the ones producing the products. LPs are restricted for advertising. And ultimately, we still see buses wrapped in Bacardi Breezer signs and, cowboy hats given away with every six-pack of beer you buy. So it's really going to be an interesting environment that we operate in here. So This is where I start talking about the provincial level law and how a retailer goes and gets a license. So as I said, the AGLC will be overseeing all cannabis licensees and authorizing them to do certain things. But when you want to apply for an Alberta retail license, they've really made it difficult to just throw your name in the hat, unlike the liquor licenses, be within the proximity, have your development permit, and get a liquor store. Unfortunately, first here, we have to go through a very large due diligence process, submit our location to the AGLC, have it posted, watch to see if anyone else objects to it. 21 days later, after there has been no objections, the AGLC then comes back to you and says, did you get a development permit from the city? Which is ultimately the really important part within the entire process. If you did, you bring it back to them. They say, okay, now we're going to see if you're a criminal. They start looking at your background check, your the financial history, your tax history, and they ultimately make a decision of whether they want to issue you this license. The key, though, in that whole process is getting your development permits and not being a criminal. But ultimately, if you are so lucky to have a development permit issued to you because you have met all of the municipal bylaws, you ultimately then will have a license issued to you for 1 or 2 years. If you ultimately have this license, you suddenly think it's a gold mine, we're ready, we're going to sell this thing for $10 billion to some big LP that comes along like Aurora, good luck. If you sell your license to anyone, it immediately is not assignable and is canceled on a change of control. So those types of things are the headaches that retailers like us have to deal with. So upon the cancellation, this doesn't cancel the development permit that you were issued, which of course, again, is part of the really important thing. But the AGLC now makes the next guy go through all these hoops, and someone could swoop in. I guess if there wasn't a development permit issued. So that's why it is the most important part. So ultimately, as I said, they will not issue a license unless a development permit is issued. What they are going to do then within the store is they're going to be really governing the price that any retailer can sell the product. And they do this through a variety of different methods. And one of the big concerns, I started to touch on this earlier, of the AGLC was how do they allow a licensed producer to open up a store in Calgary, let's say, and not really undercut all the other prices, because essentially we can grow it for $1.80, let's say, and sell it to the public at whatever price we wanted, while other retailers actually have to go and buy it wholesale. So what the AGLC did was they inserted a minimum wholesale price of cannabis that they can charge. And this is not a set price, but at any one point in time, the price that my licensed producer sells the cannabis to the AGLC, that must be the same price for everybody across the board. And then, of course, if they see that the retailer who has purchased it back from the license or purchased it back from the AGLC is undercutting everybody else because they've decided to make all the margin on the licensed producer side, that's when the AGLC has the authority to swoop in and set minimum prices. So, those are huge, huge issues that really are competition issues. They allow the AGLC to start dictating prices throughout the province. And that's a lot unlike many other substances or even consumer packaged goods that we see. So again, this is going to be a very different regime than we see in other products. And I think even what is naturally the comparable product being alcohol and how it's sold, it's not going to be the same. And licensed producers and retailers have to be really aware of this. The law also this is at the provincial level law, has allowed the minimum distances from hospitals and schools to be 100 meters. They also allowed for the municipalities to swoop in and set their own minimum distances. So we've seen different locations across the province do different things. I've got a couple charts and things like this in this presentation later on that outlines everything, but currently Calgary was 300 meters from any other cannabis store. It had to be separated. 150 meters from any school or hospital, and Edmonton has its own. So these are the things that when you're looking to get into the retail store game, you have to really pay attention to. Edmonton is different than Calgary, which is different than Lethbridge, which is different than Sylvan Lake or Red Deer, et cetera, et cetera. So wrapping your head around those is, I guess it can be easy, but now what's going to go on in the store? So from an operational point of view, retailers are really, really going to struggle to keep up with things. And I look at ourselves, and I get into some of the inventory tracking systems that we have to have. But as you're wrapping your head around these, how do we actually accomplish this? So first and foremost, unlike liquor stores, you can't bring your kids into a dispensary. So I'm not sure if you're like me, but as I was growing up, my mom would go and pick up a bottle of wine and drag me into the liquor store, and as a 4-year-old, I was exposed to all this booze and developed a problem thereafter. But luckily, I guess my kids will not have that same problem, because you can't bring any kids into the liquor store or into the dispensary. So there's one distinction. Of course, windows have to be all blacked out, so there's no cannabis visible from the outside in. And ultimately, this is very much like liquor stores, but you cannot sell to intoxicated persons. It's simple and plain. Of course, you can't sell to people who come in stinking like booze and are drunk, but a guy comes in with red eyes and he's like, man, I want to buy a joint. And you're like, I sell joints. Like, this is great. You can't sell to him. And ultimately, the AGLC has really set a strict training program to all retailers that we have to go through. It's about a 5-hour training course called Sell Safe that just hammers on these things to your employees. And ultimately, they have to go through a series of checks that every single person comes into the store. And are they intoxicated? How do they get here? Do they look like they're going to be selling to minors? A lot of things, of course, that liquor stores do as well. But it's going to be about tenfold for cannabis stores. And of course, the most simple one here is only LP cannabis can be sold. So how is that going to be really regulated? It's not like liquor where people are making moonshine and no one's going to buy moonshine in a liquor depot or wherever. But here, cannabis is grown, and we're having a homegrown market. So you think of the inspectors and the AGLC, and how are they really going to monitor this? It's not going to be easy to really ensure that only LP cannabis is sold within the stores. What happens if it's in fake packaging? What happens if the packaging has been resealed? We've seen this quite a lot already, and I've always heard rumors about LPs and such having these issues of selling black market product. How can you ensure that product is not going out the back doors or coming in the back door, I guess, when it's just cannabis? Once it's in its packaging, you're not going to know the difference between anyone else's. So this is the things that the AGLC really has to wrap their head around. And I think through the inventory tracking systems that they've implemented, I'll get into them later, they will. One of the most interesting things we've seen, and this is perhaps from an investor side, is that there's no supplier-licensee relationships allowed. And they've ultimately said that no agreements entered into by any of the LPs with any specific retailer is going to be valid going into the future. And then now we're seeing in the cannabis markets, like the public markets, TSX, all these different licensed producers coming out and being like, hey, we're selling all of our weed or 5% of our weed to whatever storefront in Alberta, and they've signed on for XYZ amount. Sorry, where was I? Am I going back? Anyways, and they're making these announcements, of course, just to see a rise in stock price. Big news, Fire and Flower is selling 100% of our weed. It said Emblem, unfortunately. AGLC swooped in and says, actually, if you had read the law prior to this, then you would know that that announcement was null and void prior to ever making it, or that agreement was null and void. So when you look at what the gold rush or the green rush that we're having happen here, even the public companies who are supposed to have a knowledge base of this law and are keeping track of this because this is their lifeblood, aren't getting it right. So going into the future, it's going to be so important for retailers to buckle down and understand this law, having tracking systems, etc. And this is to kind of the supply chain that I'm talking about and how things are going to flow. So you can see that the supplier is where the weed starts. That's the LP. They sell their product to the AGLC, which ultimately has its own online retail store, and then will either sell it directly to the consumer or will sell it to the licensed retailer who thereafter sells it to the consumer. This allows for the AGLC to track the product through the supply chain and then also get their piece out of the supply chain as they mark it up in between. But it also really allows them to ensure competition is fair between all entities. And this goes back to the separation of business rule that I mentioned earlier, where The retailer has to sell their product to the AGLC and keep track of it separately, or buy it from the AGLC and keep track of it separately from the licensed producer, all to ensure fair competition. So this gets into all the specifics of what the AGLC requires us to actually do to ensure that we are not just undercutting the little guy. And that's one thing, but it all comes from the liquor laws of why this was actually put in place. And if you look at the scenario that these laws came from, it was Costco wanted to open up its own liquor store and sell its own booze. And since you're already buying everything you buy at Costco, you might as well buy your booze there, and there would be a natural unfair competition advantage to Costco over all the private liquor stores in Alberta. That's very much unlike cannabis, where we are not the one-stop shop for everything. Just pick up some weed while you're there. Instead, you have to separately come to us. So they've implemented some laws here that are exceptionally overbroad and really require us to run our businesses with additional staff, additional requirements for compliance, additional accounting and record keeping, all to ensure that we have separate businesses, just as every other business does. And it's going to be a struggle, and I think a lot of retailers, especially the licensed producers that are getting into the game today, are going to struggle. And I've already heard of some of the biggest players in the market that you know of, having to show that they're a separate business from their licensed producer or from whatever it is. And that's going to be a real issue. So again, so what do we have to do as a retailer to ensure our records are there and able to indicate to the AGLC exactly all of our sales? I mean, they're unbelievably broad. Have our inventory tracking system, always be able to perform inventory counts, identify outdated, recalled, damaged product, and then destroy it, have its own method of destruction, keep track of all footage of the entire facility for 2 years, or each retail store for 2 years, on site at all times. So if you are open for, let's call it 14 hours a day, you've got your 25 cameras running throughout your store, you're keeping video footage on hard drives, you have 10 stores across Alberta, and each camera has, the data for each camera has to be kept for 2 years on site. So we're talking its own security or secure storage systems database on each site. Then we have to keep inventory counts, all of our sales, all of our supporting documents. It's going to be unbelievable. I think we're going to see when the AGLC opened this up, you know, it was for the little guy to get it. It was for mom and pop to go finally open up your dispensary and have the little store, and that was always the dream. But shit, you're going to have 1,000 hours of record keeping for every camera that you have. You know, that secure storage or database is going to cost $600,000. You know, the AGLC policy is great. They've done a fantastic job at overseeing the liquor stores. But just due to the cautious nature that cannabis attracts, we're also going to have even broader requirements for dispensaries, which is tracking data, keeping customer logs, etc., checking ID at the point of coming in the store and again upon the sale of cannabis. So just being in a store, you have to have your ID checked twice. It's crazy. It's crazy. But it's, you know, but it's the name of the game, and you ultimately, if you don't bite the hand of City Hall, and that if this is what they want, I think a lot of the retailers are ready to buckle down. But I think there's going to be a very big discrepancy of those that are able to stay in compliance going forward and those aren't. So what do we need for security requirements? This is one of the stores that we're opening up here in Alberta. And you can see that the entire interior of the store has to be monitored by a security camera at all times, every inch of it. The perimeter all has to be monitored. All doors and entrances and exits have to be monitored. As I said, you have to keep those that record, data on file for 2 years. It's not going to be easy. And then in terms of security requirements, further, as I said, display cases have to be locked. They've actually just announced a bunch of new information, and we're only able to have 15 containers of cannabis for display with cannabis present within them, maximum of 2 grams within each container available. So 15 little sniff jars that all 30 of our customers at a time in the store are able to handle at one point in time. Those all have to be locked down to the counter. When not in use, have to be stored within a secure display case. After hours, all have to be stored within our secure room, which is going to be inspected as we are building it out by the AGLC to ensure the walls are built with certain material. It's deep. And then ultimately, again, this is a little bit of the details of the application process that we go through, but you can see that each step that we go through is a onerous requirement. The application process for every store was 70 pages long. Had to detail the names of every single shareholder you have and their percentage of shares that they own. Anyone who held over 5% had to go through an even further detailed record check. I mean, just to get through this process, this wasn't the gold rush that everyone thought it was. It's really limited to only a certain number of people that can play. And I look at all the groups that have been operating in the cannabis space, and I always like to use the analogy that legalization is built on the back of AIDS patients, advocates, and cancer patients. Here, not a lot of those people are going to be able to play, and it's tough when you have to go through a record check, and if there's a mark on your record for possession or trafficking, you're out, even though you're one of the pioneers. So I look at a lot of the groups that I know of in town and some of the smaller players that own head shops and such, and there's concerns, and I know they have concerns, everyone does. So this is a chart that ultimately goes through every single province and lists a few of the important distinctions as you go through each province. There's small, minute, different details that, I would argue the way you're able to transport cannabis is the biggest distinction between every one of the private retail provinces, other than Saskatchewan, which is doing its online sales through the producer or the retailers there, as opposed to the AGLC or the equivalent having their own model. But you can see, I mean, just to play in the game, this is what you're keeping track of. And when I made this chart, not everything was out yet. And it's slowly being released as we speak. I think BC is still not out with their legislation. And again, this is just a chart about how Edmonton is different than Calgary, or a little bit of info about how Edmonton is different from Calgary. Their process, the most notable distinction is when applying here, it was on a first come, first served basis as we have submitted our applications. In Edmonton, it's on a lottery system basis. So I'll use ourselves as an example. We intended to have one store in Edmonton. So we went out, secured one location, dealt with one landlord, thought it was a great spot, knew there would be no one within 300 meters around it. And now we're finding out that in the lottery system that they're about to unleash, we have one ball in the game, as opposed to having 50 like we could have had we just gone out and signed 1,000 leases and tried to get things done and screwed over a bunch of landlords. It's really interesting. This is just a point of how this is slowly rolling out, and not everyone knows what is going on at one point in time, and it's all just a surprise. So lastly, this goes to every single city in Alberta, and you can see, again, not a lot of it is announced, but what the distinction is between each city. It's going to be tough to keep track of. I expect there's going to be a lot of failure going forward and a big bloodbath. And that's not for a lack of acumen. It's going to be small, different things that everyone deals with. It's going to be interesting. There's a lot of people who are passionate about the industry that are just entering because it's finally their time. I hope they're ready. There's a lot of corporate Canada who's getting involved in this too, and they're just throwing money at it. I hope you're ready too, because passion drives this industry. It's an industry built on the back of advocates. And I really hope that not everyone is pushed out of it, and that we can really keep the experience. I know within our stores, we have tried to pay homage to the existing user, and not purely aimed on the new marginal user under a sheet that is going to only buy chic, cool products. We wanted to remember who this was really happening for, who the 20% is buying the 80% of product. I hope we see that going forward. That's that.
Fantastic. Now, we do have some time for questions. If you're open to taking questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we got a few. All right. Since you're closer.
I assume because you didn't put it in your spreadsheet that you may not know, but it says that liquor stores have to be 100 meters away in Edmonton, but what does not adjacent mean? Like not in the same complex, not right next door?
It's a good question. So it actually means something different in every city. In Calgary here, it means you cannot share a wall with another cannabis retailer or a liquor store, sorry, or it can be extended into you cannot be across the parking lot from another cannabis or another liquor store. However, instead of a parking lot, if there is a City of Calgary road between you and a liquor store, you are not adjacent. So it's up in the air. Calgary, I think, is going to see a few challenges on that. Is why is this liquor store that is, across a parking lot allowed when it is 30 feet from it, as opposed to this liquor store across the street allowed because it is 10 feet across a street, not a parking lot. That's the reality of it. So some of this doesn't make a lot of sense, some of it does, but it's going to be different everywhere.
Hi, do you know if they're going to allow, or if it's coming down the pipe, offering liquor, like the way you get a liquor license? Like if me and my girlfriends wanted to go to a spa, but they don't offer alcohol, we can get a liquor license for, say, a birthday party. So is that something that may be allowed, or have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard. I've wanted to know the answer to that myself. For the same reasons, just using a different example. So we're having a party at our office. It's a Stampede party. We've decided it's not going to be booze. It's going to be weed. Can we go get a weed license and start serving up weed on a commercial scale, or just to our 100, 200 closest friends? I don't know. I haven't seen anything. As of today, I did see the Calgary Herald had an article out that there's going to be consumption spaces allowed at festivals. So, I guess it's going to be like a weed garden, which I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, I mean, and all the effects of this are going to be really interesting because there's going to be tons of smoke coming out of this thing, and our kids who are going to be able to walk through it and something there's going to be so many headaches coming up that it's going to be interesting to see how the provinces and the federal government adjusts this law over time to allow things like that.
Of course, the regulation has changed slightly from blacked out windows to seeing into shops but not being able to see cannabis. What is the definition that includes? Is that purely actual cannabis products, or does that include images and representations of cannabis, such as posters or selling documents, anything like that?
Yeah, so the one piece of law that you cited does not allow you to see into the store to see any cannabis. There's another piece of law, another clause within the same legislation or the AGLC policy that indicates that no advertising or promotion of any marketing material can be visible to anywhere that someone who is under 18 years old could see it. So I think you fall under the advertising piece of law if there's like a poster with a big weed leaf inside and you could see it from outside. Suddenly the advertisement inside the store, which is allowed because it is being made somewhere that someone who is 18 is not allowed in generally, can be seen from the outside, which is where someone who is under 18 is likely. So it's that provision that would catch you there, I suspect, but it's a good question. I bet they haven't thought of that.
Are you aware of AGLC's restrictions on accessories?
Yeah, it's between the AGLC and then the new federal government policy regarding branding and such that they've made amendments to the federal act for. It's going to be tough. Cannabis and cannabis accessories are the two things that you're allowed to sell in your store, and that specifically excludes hoodies in your store. And this is prior to the new federal law that is restricting hoodies from being part of the branding and such that you're doing. But a cannabis accessory is a grinder, papers, I guess bongs, things like that. It's not hot knives, unfortunately. So no one does hot knives anymore. So unless you are cannabis or a cannabis accessory, you cannot be sold. And can cannabis accessories be branded and such? Yes, likely. But unless you fall into those things, you are not being sold in a dispensary. And as I said, hoodies, T-shirts, all those items are excluded. from being
Will
cannabis
there be
accessory.
limitations on a value of accessory versus cannabis product?
Sorry.
Like a percentage of total sales?
There isn't any. I would argue that you would have to be, have a majority being 51% cannabis sold there over accessories, but I don't have a great answer for you on that.
Hi. Apparently, there's a 30-gram limit on selling to consumers. So is that over 24 hours, or how is that going to be regulated? Do you know?
30 gram, the limit is on the sale, of course, so it's at, from the store, we can only sell one person 30 grams that day. And I'm guessing it actually misses the mark on your question of whether you can walk out that store and go buy another 30 grams from someone else. Of course, you can't be in possession of more than 30 grams at a time unless you are a medical patient. But yeah, I don't think it catches that, which is really interesting. It's a great point. Really?
No.
That's a sweet law they've put in place there. As long as you're not in possession of it. So give it to your buddy, go grab another 30, give it to that guy, go grab another 30, got 90 grams of weed.
There's a follow-up question as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more question. A couple slides back on the provincial comparisons, you were showing sealed packages versus closed packages. Do you know the difference between that? Getting from the AGLC
Yeah, that's
to
interesting.
closed packages? Oh, okay.
No, it's a great question. This is where I put my lawyer hat on and I'm interpreting the difference between sealed and closed. Sealed obviously would mean, I think from the LP, it is sealed and has not been broken, versus closed, it's just like, yeah, I screwed the cap on. That's strange here, and I wonder why they've used that language. It's a good catch.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question about signage outside there. We cannot use a leaf as part of our logo, no?
No, you
No.
cannot.
So you would just put your store name
Just your store name.
and no
your-
cannabis, because the New Brunswick people put cannabis on there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Again, you're so limited. So I think you can have the word cannabis in your name, but you cannot have any reference to dope, weed, anything like that. And then, of course, regarding the logo, you can have your corporate logo, but unfortunately, if that has a cannabis leaf in it, you cannot have that. Nor can you have a green cross or anything that it would represent, some form of medicinal use.
But you could use that on your accessories that you're putting.
Yes,
You can
yes.
print them out, your papers, your filters, all that. Put your logo on it.
Without having seen the regulations yet, because this is the federal regulations, they will be out within about 2 weeks, as my understanding, and don't hold me to that because it's just speculation. There isn't a clear answer on it, but based on the Federal Cannabis Act as it reads today, as well as the AGLC's policy and the provincial law, there's actually no restrictions on what you can put on these grinders and papers. And it's a really interesting point. So if you go to tobacco, which I think is the natural advertising avenue to think of when you're looking at cannabis and the restrictions concerning it, one of the ways that tobacco has actually skirted all the advertising requirements is tobacco is not allowed to advertise cigarette brands, but Rizlas are able to have sponsor events, be all over different sports teams and things like that. And I just learned that the other day, that a lot of the tobacco companies, what they've done for advertising is they jump on the opportunity to advertise all of the, we'll call them tobacco accessories, instead of tobacco itself. So I think we're going to see the cannabis industry come up with some really creative ways to brand and market itself going forward. And that would be, just one of them is like, own Rizla. That's a great company, and because you can have Rizla swag all you want. You just can't have LP swag.
Good answer. And it goes back to your point, Jason, about being built on the backs of advocates. And as we've seen over the last day and a half, this is a hugely passionate community. And that is what's going to help drive this. It's going to be tough from a perspective of traditional marketing. So
Absolutely.
we have a question in the back here.
Hi, Matt. So I was in the City of Calgary presentation yesterday, and a couple things that he said that I don't know if you're aware of yet. So apparently the city is overruling that blackout window rule, and now the rule is you're allowed to see into the store, but you are not allowed to see cannabis. I don't know if it's passed or not, but he said it's coming. And secondly, the events and festivals. That one he talked about as well, and said the major concern is that there's going to be no on-site sales of the product within these cannabis gardens, as he called them. And so that's the city's main concern. They are going to allow them, but they are very concerned about people bringing in all sorts of products of their own. So, and then, are you familiar with pending trademarks as well? Because I tried to open a retail cannabis store in Calgary for the past 8 months. I'm actually talking at 4:30 about it. And my store name is Studio 420 Calgary, and apparently my store name is illegal because 420 Clinic has trademarked 420, which will be coming out at legalization. So I have been advised to find another name, but I now need to find another location and another logo and another. So yeah, I get the perils of what you're talking about.
Yeah, your point about the cannabis gardens, at least, is really interesting because it's the flip side. And, now they're saying where there's no on-site purchasing of cannabis being done here at these gardens, which is contrary to the argument of why we should always have these cannabis cafes and places for consumption, is because, with dispensaries, we have an avenue to purchase cannabis, but then without a consumption site, there's nowhere to smoke it. So here, that's the flip side of the argument, is now inside festivals, we're really worried that no one knows where to buy their weed, and they're going to be buying black market weed instead. It's interesting. Sure. Just to the other side of the coin. I think I was aware, I said the wrong thing earlier on regarding you can't see into stores. I call it blacked out windows. Yeah, you can see into stores, just can't see cannabis products now. So a lot of groups, I think, are putting a wall in between where they're having, a display of whatever, so their store looks really cool. And behind that wall is where cannabis is sold and cannabis is present, but from the outside, you can only see cannabis in now. Or I see this wall of whatever it is, marketing.
More guerrilla marketing, obviously. We've got two questions way on the other side.
Making you run.
And as I walk, it comes back to building that word of mouth and community, which I like to say, controlling word of mouth.
Thank you. When it comes to the shipping and receiving of cannabis from wholesaler to retailer, is there anything in place? How will that actually be delivered? I mean, I know right now liquor, just the truck backs up, they offload it, but with cannabis, are there sort of separate rules surrounding that? Will the retailer or even the wholesaler have to be on the hook for the security, let's say, of however they're delivering it to the retail site?
The AGLC has made no announcements, and I've had this discussion with them as well as many other people, is like, even where is it being stored in between? So the way the law works, as I said, is the AGLC will purchase it from the licensed producer. So ultimately, LP delivers it to the AGLC wherever this is, and then the AGLC ultimately sells it to the retailer. We store liquor at these big Connect warehouses, which have been purpose-built for the storage of liquor. Cannabis isn't the same product, of course. We have humidity considerations, we have heat considerations. There's the half-life of cannabis, which we're not actually sure of, but for spoilage purposes, at what point do you consider it spoiled? There's going to be huge legal ramifications coming onto the AGLC going forward, which I'm sure they are thinking of this, like this isn't news to them. But what happens when a licensed producer says, okay, we're going to ship you 1,000 kilos of prepackaged weed in these sealable containers, so because they have to leave the LP facility in the final product form. So now all these packages, these containers, get dropped off to the AGLC's, Weed Connect warehouse, and it's 700 degrees in there, and it all dries out while it's in their possession. Ultimately, every retailer which intended to purchase that weed is going to be pretty angry that there is none of that available to them, and it was spoiled in the AGLC's hands. Is the AGLC ultimately, because they took possession of it, responsible for this? I don't know. But I think this is a really good question of how is it going to actually leave a facility, get into the AGLC's hands, who's responsible for transporting it there? I imagine it's all going to be done by someone like Connect or the AGLC themselves. And they must have this answer and just not announced it yet. Yeah, armored car. But those are the considerations we shouldn't have anymore. Like, this is weed. This isn't gold. And it's available at every store. If you want some, go buy some. Like, we don't have to guard it anymore. We don't have to keep it in containers that are sealed and lockable. And, like, this isn't gold anymore. It's weed, just like liquor. And so those considerations, I don't know. But I think the AGLC is going to have to probably be responsible for picking it up from the licensed producer. Actually, as I say that out loud, someone in Ontario, an LP in Ontario, the AGLC is not going to pick it up. It's going to be shipped to the AGLC likely. So it's going to be interesting considerations going forward, and I just don't have that answer, but there's tons there.
Excellent. So we got one more in the middle here.
What about websites for the retail store? There's a big one.
Yeah, so we can have a website, but we
Yeah.
have to ensure and take reasonable steps to ensure that it is not visible in the marketing behind the website to anyone under 18. And so arguably, what is a reasonable step to ensure someone is over 18? Entering their date of birth, is that good enough? I don't know. But the websites are available. Of course, you can't sell cannabis through your website. That's all sold by the AGLC. But it's going to be interesting because I think these are the things that we're just going to throw up this website, we'll be really proud of it, spend $100,000 on it, then the AGLC is going to come through and say, sorry, that's available to kids, take that down, and we'll be on the hook for $100,000. And I think that's going to come. Like, I mean, LPs that aren't paying attention, starting to really drill down on their compliance, retailers who aren't doing the same, you're going to get grilled because, I mean, they are going to be slapping hands left, right, and center. And I think that's something, I've said it 5 times already, like, get ready for compliance because this is going to be as strict of a regime as it gets.
You must love this being a lawyer, especially with wording like reasonable.
Yeah, love it. I'm trying not to be a lawyer these days. I just want to be in the weed
I think
game.
we've got time for, if it's quick, 2 more.
Just interested in any insight you can provide on, I understand plain packaging, but within the retail shops itself, will there be branded packaging that we can display in display cases that will then be inside plain packaging? Any insight on limitations?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking of those exact same things these days. Like, how can you get around them? So the plain packaging, the way it reads is it has the immediate container to which cannabis is sold in, which is the ultimate container it leaves the storefront in, which is immediate means like the stuff the cannabis is touching actually has to be this plain packaging. So the answer to your question is no, and I actually thought the same thing. Like, well, what about the box that we put the weed box in? And you guys aren't thinking, or the inside of the box?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the stuff that we're all thinking about right now, and they seem to be pretty strict on it. The immediate container has to be plain packaging. So,
Have you heard anything from LPs how they would be organizing themselves to be able to brand their product in store or?
yeah, so in store we're allowed. I think I alluded to this earlier. Because minors are not allowed in the store, it's fair game inside. So I would expect displays, knowledge centers, salesmen inside, marketing product. I think salesman's a stretch, but the inside of stores is fair game, and very much like Shakar said previously, you can see LPs are already doing this. They're renting space. Like, I'm sorry, you guys are employing 12 people. Like, oh, that's a lot of. People are paying a lot just to have their little booth there to support like the 15 employees you guys have. That's a ton. So I think that the LPs are already realizing that the inside of medical clinics and the display of products or display of branding components will be inside the store is going to be one of the highlights of branding in this marketplace.
Right. So I'm expecting LPs to carry the ball there and do that in order to
Yeah,
facilitate.
absolutely. Well, LPs will be able to brand and market their own things through limited channels. Retailers obviously have very similar retail channels. Any joint advertising between LPs and retailers has to be entirely paid for by the retailer, not the LP. So they're offloading it onto the group that probably has the least money in that equation, which will really restrict it. Everything has to be all branding and et cetera has to be stored for 2 years on site. Like, all records of branding and any joint advertising efforts has to be stored on site for 2 years going forward. I mean, like, it's insane, but it's the game you sign up to play, so it's kind of cost of doing business.
Okay, and last question.
So if I understand correctly, retailers are not going to be able to modify the product at all? I've
Yeah.
heard of some retailers looking to, like, get into a supply agreement with a producer and then create their own proprietary product. Is that not possible under these laws?
It would have to leave the LP's site in that final form. Is that to the heart of your question? Like, it would be, let's call it 51st Cannabis. Our LP would have to sell the 51st Cannabis with the entire branded product out of its store, which just is sold in the AGLC, and then, technically, based on the law, Aurora could swoop in and buy it all from us, even though it was 51st Cannabis, product. So yeah, the joint, I don't actually know how it's going to work, but with the final form of product having to be leaving the LP, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I don't have a great answer for you, actually.
Okay, thank you.